Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. My name's Nathan, and once again we're going to be covering an Advent of Code solution today. This time we're going to be covering day 4, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. Now, day 4 is all to do with camp cleanup. Once again, we've got a bunch of elves who have been assigned a section of the camp to clean up, or multiple sections to clean up, and these elves have split themselves into pairs, which are denoted by each line here, and the comma basically separates their sort of range that indicates which sections of the camp they're in charge of cleaning up. So in this first example, we've got our first elf, which needs to clean up sections 2, 3, and 4, and our second, which needs to clean up 6, 7, and 8. This is illustrated a little bit more clearly further down, where we've got, once again, our first example, 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. And part 1 is all about identifying pairs of elves where one list is completely consumed, or I guess 100% overlapped with the other list in the pair. So in this sort of visual representation, that would be this list, because the 3 to 7 is fully within 2 to 8. There's no sort of unique numbers in 3 to 7. And in the one below, 6 to 6, which is obviously just a single digit, as you can see here, is fully consumed by 4 to 6. Now, if we look at any of the others, we can see, obviously, the first example, there's absolutely no overlap, so don't need to worry about that. But even for ones like the bottom one, although 4, 5, and 6 overlap, we have 2 and 3, which are unique to the first elf, and 7 and 8, which are unique to the second elf. So although there's overlap, neither of the lists is like completely covered or consumed by the other one. So I hope that explains the sort of premise of this first challenge. And all we have to do is, once again, work through each line, figure out whether there's a total overlap or total consumption, whichever you want to sort of refer to it as. Yeah, and sum those up and see how many pairs we have that behave like that. So go ahead and jump straight into Alteryx. Once again, first couple of tools are literally just bringing our data in, so really no need to worry about those. Our text to columns, once again, just splitting our single cell of data that comes out of the download tool into a line or a record each with our line break delimiter /n. And what I've actually done just for the purpose of this video is created this sort of second branch, which makes things easier to follow. My original solution, which I will quickly show at the end, is more of a sort of tool golf one, which is, if you're not familiar with tool golf or building things in Alteryx, it's basically where us members of the community who were doing these, decided to push things a bit further and see who could do them in the fewest number of tools. So yeah, there was obviously a two-tool solution for this, I guess, which I'll show at the end, but it's not really intuitive, and you probably wouldn't use this approach if you were building something in a business sense, because yeah, trying to read like the statements and things just isn't very reader friendly and wouldn't be like best practice to document it in that way, kind of thing. So yeah, I've created this second branch to basically do it in a clearer way, which hopefully makes it easier to understand for anyone watching. So we'll go ahead and jump to our first text to columns, which just splits it out. And although I've shown it in when I was sort of going over the challenge, we can see that our elves are, we don't have all of the numbers of the list, we just have the sort of start and end. So here would be 71 to 97, but obviously that includes all the numbers in between. And we know that our elves are separated by a comma. So first thing to do when we have a situation like this is to obviously just split this field into the two elves. And we can do that by using another text to columns tool, where we provide a comma as the delimiter, and we just make sure we've ticked split columns, and we obviously only want this going into 2 columns. If we increased it to 3 or anything, that wouldn't do anything anyway, because there's only one column, or only one comma to split on. Sorry. So as you can see from the output anchor of our text to columns, we've now got our 2 elves separated into their own field. Yeah, and we can take this a step further. So the approach I took, I basically split all the ranges out into their start and end number. So obviously in this first one, the start is 71 and the end is 97. And for elf number 2 of this record, their range starts at 71 and ends at 72. So all I'm going to do is use another couple of text to columns tool and basically split each elf into its sort of start and end number. So if we go ahead and jump into the result of the first one, you can see that this time I've just provided a hyphen as the delimiter, and again 2 columns because there's only going to be 2 numbers coming out of it, the start and the end. So you can see now the result of splitting these columns. First record, again, just for example, we get our 71 starting number and our 97 ending number. And I'm just going to jump to after the select now, because in this second text to columns tool, I literally just do the same again, but for the download data to column, which represents our second elf. And then select, I just untick a couple of unnecessary fields. To be honest, I could untick these as well. The URL, download data, and download headers aren't needed anymore. But it was mainly just to fit it all on one results pane for the sake of the video. So, and in the approach I take, you'll see in my formula tools, I'm actually comparing these by their numeric values. And obviously, as we've been splitting these, all of the results still just come out as string fields. So in the select, I'm also gonna make these fields numeric. So all of these are the outputs of our 2 text to columns fields, and I've just renamed these like so as well. So the abbreviation here was just the one I used as I was working through the challenge, and I just sort of referred to it as range 1 number 1, range 1 number 2, range 2 number 1, and range 2 number 2, where range basically just refers to the elf 1 and 2. So yeah, all I've done as well is again convert these to a numeric data type so that I can actually compare their numeric value in the following formula tool. So the formula tool is where we actually start to work out what overlaps, and I'll just reveal the first statement for now, because the second one is what we actually use for part 2. So I'll go back and sort of explain part 2 before revealing that. And as you can see, really sort of easy, simple if statement here. So all we're saying here is if the lower number of the first range, so elf 1's, I guess, start number, is less than or equal to the start number of elf number 2, and the end number of elf number 1 is greater than or equal to the end number of the second elf's, I guess, end number, then that means that elf number 2 or range number 2 is fully contained within elf 1. So we print 1 out because all we're going to do in the end is sum our contains check. So this basically just acts as a count. When we sum these all, it'll just act as a count for the amount of times where this occurs. Now the else if is to just do this the other way around, because this one checks whether or not elf2 is fully contained within elf1, but it can also be the other way around. So elf1 can also be fully contained within elf2's range. So the else if, sorry, just conducts that check. So if the starting number of elf2 is lower than or equal to the starting number of elf1, and the final number of elf2's range is larger than or equal to elf1's range, or the top end of elf1's range, then we also print 1, because again, that means that elf1's range is totally contained within elf2's. So we would want to add that to the count. And obviously, if neither of these are satisfied, that means that there may be overlap or there may be no overlap at all. But it means that they certainly aren't fully contained within each other one way or the other. So we just print 0, so that record isn't sort of added to our final count. Again, we'll just make sure that this is actually numeric, because in the final step, once again, we're just going to be summarizing by taking the sum of all these ones and zeros for our contains check. If I quickly flick to the summarize, you see that for this we get 560, which is the count of how many checks are totally contained within the other one, like in this example. And as you can see, 560 was our answer. Now, part 2 is just a sort of simple twist to this, really. So instead of looking at where these numbers fully overlap or are like fully consumed by one or another, we just want to count the number of pairs where any overlap at all happens. So again, if we scroll back up to this sort of illustration, this one, there's no overlap because 2, 3, and 4, then obviously neither of them have 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's no overlap happening at all there. Again, 2 and 3, 4 and 5, there's no overlap. Here we do have some overlap because the 7 is in both lists. These 2 that were counted for our part 1 would also be counted for part 2 because we're just looking at any records where there is full or any overlap at all, and obviously these fully overlap, which satisfies that. And again, for the final one of the example we're provided with, the 4, 5, and 6 overlap, so that would also get added to our count. So if we jump back into Ultrix, I'll go over how I've sort of set this one up. In terms of the if statement, it's actually very similar. So this time, all I'm saying is if the low number or starting number of the first elf is greater than or equal to the starting number or lower bound of elf2, and it's less than the upper bound or upper number of elf2, then that means the range is, that means that elf1 has at least some numbers within the range of elf2. And then, much like part 1, that's checked for overlap that way around, and the else if just handles it the other way around. So this time we're just checking whether or not some of elf2's range is also contained within elf1. And then the rest of the statement is exactly the same. So if these are satisfied, we print 1, because we're just going to use sum at the end to essentially perform a count. And if neither of them are satisfied, then we print 0, because we obviously don't want those records added to the count. Again, just ensure that this field is actually numeric, otherwise we won't be able to sum it in our summarize tool. And yeah, when we go ahead and aggregate those up, we get 839, where there is at least some overlap taking place. And jumping back over to the website, we can see that that was our answer. So that's it for day 4. A little bit shorter than day 3. I think moving forwards, especially for the days that are a bit more complex and involve macros, especially when they're nested inside each other, I'll probably stop breaking down individual tools and just sort of give an overview of what sections are doing. Otherwise, the videos will just get far too long. But yeah, nice shorter one today again, and hope you guys have enjoyed it. Catch you in the next one. Thanks.